All right, Jack, welcome out to the ranch, man. Thanks for coming.
Thanks, man. Thanks for having me here. It's beautiful. And love this building here, and your studio is incredible.
Well, yeah, we're pretty blessed. It's like we're talking about how the guy who made it,
Yeah.
he was like a legit genius. Um, he logged the property, pulled it down here with draft horses, milled it himself, and built this place. Then built the house, then built all
Yeah.
the outbuildings. It was like a 30-year process, like a labor of love, and just got too old to manage all of it and sold it to us. Yeah, it's just a blessing to live here. It's pretty cool.
Yeah, it's pretty awesome, man. Love being back in the Pacific Northwest, so I appreciate the invite.
Yeah, absolutely. So, Jack Stewart, author of Unknown Rider, and then the entire Battleborn series. Man, I love the books so much.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Like, you get a ton of get this dialed in here.
Yeah.
Yeah, good enough. You get a like when you have any sizable following on social media, just ton of people send you books.
Yeah.
And I try to read them, like especially if they're my friends and stuff. And you read a lot of cool books, but this series was like amazing.
Yeah, thank you.
I was like instantly hooked. Like I started reading Unknown Rider at night, and then I wanted to hear it during the day because I, out working and stuff. So I bought the audiobook, and Ray Porter was reading it. Like, what a legend.
Oh, he is the GOAT. When you talk about the greatest of all time for narrators, Ray Porter is amazing. And there's a ton of other talented narrators out there, but I was a huge fan before, he read my books. And so the first time the publisher sent me the audio files with him narrating, I was just like, pinch me now, like hearing my words come out of Ray's mouth was pretty awesome.
Yeah, it's so engaging, and we'll get all into it. But I love, like, especially when I was younger, I love this genre of books.
Yeah.
And then kind of moved away from it as you get busy with your career and everything. And reading again, I was telling my wife, it's like the best I could explain it was like watching the new Top Gun.
Yeah.
With the way it makes you feel, like it's just like a throwback to a different time when it's just exciting and fun and makes you think about flying and all the different characters that are involved in the espionage and everything. Anyway, I just tooting your horn, obviously.
Bring it on, man. Keep talking about how good I am.
Yeah, I like legit loved the series.
Yeah, thank you.
I obviously love everything Jack Carr writes, and then he finished up his kind of main series, and I really didn't have any new series that filled that gap yet. And then I got this. I'm like, okay, like let's keep them coming.
Yeah, well, good. I mean, I've got plenty of recommendations if you need more. So, but it sounds like you've probably got plenty keeping you busy here anyway.
Yeah. So getting into a little bit of your background. So looking over your resume, it's very impressive. So, Naval Academy grad, Hornet pilot, Iraq veteran, Afghanistan veteran, multiple tours of duty, pretty much done it all in the airplane so far as I've heard. And so it's a pretty amazing career. So backing that up to when you were a kid, so what was your childhood like?
It was pretty unremarkable in terms of, you always hear these really cool stories about, my mom was a librarian, or, I grew up on a ranch, I like kind of like you're doing here with your family. I just lived in the suburbs of Seattle, and I had a really great family. I had two parents still married to this day, one older sister, and we spent a lot of our summers going on road trips. And one of the things that I recall is before every road trip, we could go pick out a cassette tape that we could listen in our Walkman, and then a book. And so, for me, I always wanted to get the most bang for my buck. So I bought the biggest books I could find. And so, back then it was Tom Clancy, it was Stephen King. And so I'd sit in the back of our Ford Bronco 2 as we're cruising around Washington State, in the back reading the book. And that was pretty much my childhood. It was pretty nice.
Play any sports?
Yeah, I played soccer in like kindergarten. And then once I got a little bit older, my parents didn't really want to be those parents that really push sports and really pushed you to, do certain things. And so they sort of shied away from sports that weren't school related. So I didn't play anything official until I got to junior high. And then I started trying out for different things. Like I tried basketball, I tried baseball, all things that I did with the neighborhood, friends, but nothing organized. And then when I got the idea that I wanted to go in the military, I said, you know what, you're gonna have to run. So I better learn how to do that. So I joined track and cross country, and then carried that through high school. But my true passion was swimming, and that was, was only a high school sport. So once I got to 10th grade, it was a 3-year high school. I tried out for the swim team and made it, and then that's what I did all the way through high school, and leading into the Naval Academy, and yeah, it's been great.
Were you pretty competitive? Like, were you into it big time?
Yeah, I was. I remember also big into aviation, and so at one point, my dad disagrees when I tell this story, but I recall that my parents basically said, "Hey, we'll pay for you to go join a club swim team, or you can get your pilot's license." And being 16, whatever I was, I said, "Oh no, no, I want to go to the Olympics, so I want to join the club swim team." And so that's what I did. I did that through high school and was pretty competitive.
Yeah, I think people who haven't done it underestimate how tough swimming is.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, like any competitive level, it's basically like there's a ton of technique to it, obviously.
Yeah.
But then it's like who can suffer more,
Yes.
just
Yes.
crush themselves to go a little bit faster.
Yeah, absolutely. And the other thing is there is nothing like swimming when you're staring at a black line at the bottom of the pool for just hours on end. I mean, you're in your head, So as far as building resiliency and mental toughness, I think swimming was great for that.
Yeah, you just build up like a massive pain threshold.
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
Your entire body is probably on fire. And you're like,
Yeah.
okay, you can't stop, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Cool. When did you first decide you wanted to fly? Like you mentioned a little bit of flying in high school.
Yeah. So, my dad was a pilot just, for recreation. He got his private pilot's license when he was 16, flew his whole life. When I was a little kid, he used to take me up in a Cessna, and I couldn't even see over the dash. And I remember just listening to that stall warning horn going off, going, "Are we going to crash?" But it kind of drove me to want to know more about aviation. My mom's dad, he was a B-17 pilot in World War II, and he passed when I was just a baby. But fortunately, I have his logs, and the logs from some of his crew members. My grandmother, when she was still alive, was pretty active in the reunions that the bomb group would have every year, and so I have a ton of photos and, just the written stuff that he left behind. And so, I really had a passion for aviation just in general. But I definitely leaned more towards the military side. Like when we go to air shows in the summer, my dad would watch the aerobatics, and I was always looking at the gray and green airplanes,
Yeah. When did you get involved in military aviation at this time?
Yeah. I mean, everything, anything that was gray or green, I was all into. So I would read up everything I could. And it's funny, I'm an airline pilot now, but for the longest time, I couldn't tell you what, a certain jet was, a commercial business, commercial jet or a business jet. I had no idea what it was, but any military jet, any military aircraft, yeah, I knew what it was. I knew what its mission was. I knew what it was capable of, how fast,
Like the encyclopedia books.
Janes, absolutely.
Those are so fun.
Yeah, I was reading those books left and right. And in fact, there was, this probably would have been in the late 80s after Top Gun came out. There was a picture book that was about Top Gun, and it wasn't just a picture book, but it had a lot of cool color photos and a bunch of other stuff in it. And one of my friends had it at school, and so let me borrow it, and I took it home, and I'm showing my parents, like, "Look at this book, it's so cool." And I'm flipping through it, and I still remember the look that my parents had on their face. Were like, "Where did you get that?" I was like, "I got it from school. A friend let me borrow it." Well, this was right before Christmas, and of course, Christmas morning, I opened up a present, and I had that book in there. So they thought I had opened up my present ahead of time and
Nice.
pulled out the book.
That's cool. We're a pretty good student considering you figured out what you wanted to do at an early age?
Yeah, I would say I did what I needed to do. I mean, I was not a very good student in terms of like dedicated to studying every single night and getting my homework assignments done on time. And, I'm not what I tell my kids that I was. I knew what I needed and I did that. So when I decided I wanted to go to the Naval Academy, and that was probably like when I was 8 years old, I found out, okay, this is what you need. You need this GPA, you need this SAT score, you need these extracurricular activities. And so I was like, check, check, check. And in fact, I mean, I was a pretty mediocre student in middle school, but when I hit ninth grade and my grades started counting, I was like, okay, straight A's, here we go. So it just was a matter of shifting my mindset and getting it done.
That's interesting you say that. I think the military works really well for like task oriented people.
Yeah.
And one thing I found that I didn't, discover that I wanted to be a pilot until much later. But I'm enlisted and I started looking at all these programs to be a pilot, and it was kind of the same thing. You're like, okay, well, you need this, GPA, you need a commander's recommendation, you need this on your standardized testing.
Yeah.
You can get this much, your score can be increased by having X number of flight hours. And you just look at it and then you reverse engineer it from there.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So like I tell young people, it's like, all you got to do is figure out what you want to do.
Yep.
And that's the hardest part.
Yep.
Because then once you know what you want to do, you reverse engineer it, and then you just do everything you're supposed to do.
Yeah.
And maybe you'll hit a roadblock or something that, something out of your control.
Yeah.
And you'll have to take a turn and do something different. But for the most part, it's very transparent.
Yeah.
I always like that about it.
Yeah. In fact, I talked to my younger son. He's 16, and we talked a lot about what do you want to do? What are your plans? Because our oldest son, I can't remember when he started saying he wanted to work in the NFL. He wanted to work for an NFL team. And I was like, okay, that's every kid wants to either be a player or, be a general manager. So I thought he was kind of full of it, but he stuck with it, and he's been very regimented in what he was going to do, very methodical in the steps he needs to take to get there. Different from my other son, who's like, I don't know what I want to do. And I was like, you know what? The military is perfect for you.
Yeah.
You don't have to know. They'll tell you everything. They'll tell you where to go, what to wear, It's just, it's brainless.
Yeah, it works for late bloomers
Yeah.
too. I think it's like, it can be kind of a transition space for you.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, that's cool. All right, so now you're doing as best you can at school, trying to get into the Naval Academy. That's a pretty low acceptance rate, I'd assume.
Yeah, I think it might be a little bit tougher now. I like to joke that if I was trying to apply today, I probably wouldn't have gotten in. Maybe I was the last one that did get into my class. I don't really know, but it's a very competitive school to get into. And it's, when you're going from being the top guy in your high school, you're like the best student, the best athlete, you're popular, you've got all these, student government positions, and then you show up and everybody's that way. It's pretty humbling.
Yeah, you go from big fish in a small pond to like amongst these people that have been prepping their whole lives for this moment.
Absolutely. People like me, I guess.
They found everyone like Jack Stewart all around the country and put them all in one place.
Yeah.
Yeah. I thought about applying to the academy when I applied to ROTC, and I look back and for me being a little bit older, I was really glad I did not go that path. I don't think I would have done very well.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I graduated with prior enlisted guys, and some were very accomplished. I graduated with people like me that were right out of high school, and then we had some that went to prep schools or went to other civilian universities for a couple of years. But the craziest thing I heard, there was another Navy pilot I think had spent 3 years. And was, just a few credits shy of graduating from college, and he kept applying and got into the Naval Academy, and so he left and went. And of course, you have to do all 4 years. And I'm like thinking back, did you regret that decision? And he's like, no, I don't. But
Dang.
Yeah, that would have been more commitment than I think even I was willing to, suffer.
Yeah. Yeah. Going through when you're 18 is one thing.
Yeah.
And when you're like 22,
Yeah, exactly.
25, that would be another level of pain.
Yeah, for sure.
What was your major?
English. I mean, and it's funny when I tell people now, you know, I'm a writer and I was an English major. They're like, yeah, it makes sense. But the truth is, I went there thinking I was going to be a math major. In high school, I was not exceptionally gifted at writing or reading, and kind of had more of a math mind. And then I went and saw what real math is like at the academy, and I was like, yeah, I don't want to do this for 4 years. Let me find something easy. So they used to say poli sci and fly,
Yeah.
but you know, any group 3 majors, so political science, history, you know, or English. And I happened to have a really good English professor my plebe year, my freshman year, and I said, well, I'll pick English. You know, I don't regret it now.
That's interesting how it ended up kind of
Yeah.
coming full circle.
Yep.
That's cool. And then, so you go through the Naval Academy. How competitive was it to get a pilot slot at that time?
Not, you know, it wasn't too competitive. There's quite a few pilot spots that come out of the academy, and surprisingly, not everybody wants it, which is for me is kind of a shock because you know I watched Top Gun. I was like, that's it. I'm gonna be a pilot, and I thought everybody was the same way. But there are people that actually want to drive ships and submarines. That's kind of
In the
odd.
Navy?
Yeah, it's
Weird.
weird. So I mean, I was about smack dab in the middle of my class when I graduated, and you know, I was not in danger of being the last guy to get a pilot spot, so it wasn't overly competitive, but it wasn't like at the time at the Air Force Academy, which if you had a heartbeat and you were physically qualified, they wanted you to be a pilot. Period. It wasn't like that at the Naval Academy.
Yeah. Yeah. That's one of the benefits of the Air Force Academy is, if you make it through, you can probably get a pilot slot.
Yeah, for sure.
I mean, it is the Air Force, so it's just all about flying.
Yep.
I had an uncle who was in he ended up going to the Army Reserves, but his career spanned 38 years. Was Vietnam veteran and an Iraq War veteran in the
Yeah.
beginning of the invasion in
That's
03.
crazy.
58 years old, but anyhow, guy's just a legend in his community.
Yeah.
But he told me, he's like, go to the Air Force if you ever want to fly because
Yeah.
they have the most airplanes.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
But you don't get to land on the boat, right?
Yeah, that's true. And that's, you know, if you watch Top Gun and you're influenced like I was, I mean, that was it. There was no other way of doing it. And, you know, being an Air Force guy that the Navy Air Force thing is always back and forth. And it still continues, you know, as an airline pilot. Just the other day, I squeaked one in, which is pretty rare for me, I'll be honest. And I'm standing out there saying goodbye to the passengers because I'll only do that if it was a good landing. And one of the guys goes, well, I can tell you weren't a Navy pilot because that was a really nice landing. And my first officer says, actually, he is a Navy pilot.
Nice.
I said I just close my eyes and pray. You know, works out pretty well.
Just like shift gears into airline pilot mode.
Yeah.
Try instead of just hitting that.
Yeah, I try. You know,
wire.
I try, but sometimes it just doesn't happen.
Yeah, it's like 23 years of conditioning, right?
Yeah,
Another way.
absolutely. Yeah.
Oh, that's cool. So where'd you go to pilot training?
So I started out going to Pensacola. So I don't know if they still do this, but you know, we could go to Pensacola for API, or we could go straight to the Air Force and do the I guess their T-37 training. So I went to Pensacola, and I was thinking I was just going to live on the beach and surf every day, and you know, I was able to spend a lot of time on the beach. But I finished Pensacola in 2 months, and then it was moving to Corpus Christi, Texas.
Oh, no kidding.
Yeah.
So you didn't go to Whiting Field?
No.
What year was this?
So this would have been in fall of 1999.
Okay.
Yeah. So when you finished API, you got to choose at that point, like whether you go to Whiting Field or whether you went to Corpus Christi.
And was it T-34s in
T-34,
both locations?
yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I did a transfer program, an exchange program, whatever they're calling it, but I did Pensacola and then VT3
Okay.
at Whiting Field
Yeah.
before I went to Vance. I didn't realize they had T-38s at Corpus. That's cool.
Yeah, so the T-34s were in both places. I went to Corpus Christi, and I think that was about a 6-month stay in Corpus, and from there I selected jets, and it was like, okay, you can go to Meridian, Mississippi, which is back in the other direction I just come from, or I can just go down the road to Kingsville, Texas. So I just went down the road to Kingsville, which is it was a great place. The weather was great, and I did about a year there for jet training, and then when that was done, I selected F-18s and moved out to Virginia Beach.
What did it feel like the day you found out you were selected to fly the F-18?
It was pretty. It was a pretty good day. Yeah. Again, I keep mentioning Top Gun because had a huge influence on my life. But at the time, I knew the Tomcat was going away, but I could still select Tomcat, so that was my first choice. And I had the grades going into the boat, but for Navy pilots, for jet pilots, at the time, the Tomcat and the Prowler, you had to be at the top of your class because those two aircraft specifically were really hard to land on the aircraft carrier. And unfortunately, I was not that good at landing on an aircraft carrier. And I think, God decided to make me good because I ended up getting a lot more sea time than most of my peers in a short period of time. But at the time, I finished 10 of 10. And so Tomcats was out. They said, yeah, you're not going Tomcats, but we'll give you Hornets. And I was like, okay,
That's cool.
That's not bad. Yeah, I'll do it. I'll do it.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, is there when you're going through the jet track in the T-45, is it?
Yeah, the T-45.
Can you get a non-fighter aircraft out of that?
Then, so when I went through, that wasn't the case. So we had the E2C2 pipeline. So for our mini AWACS and the cargo planes that were carrier based, they would stay in Corpus Christi or go to Corpus Christi and fly multi-engine. So they'd fly the King Air, either the T-44 or the C-12. They would fly that and then come to Kingsville to go through T-45 training just to go to the boat, basically, in that. So, but if you went straight to Kingsville or straight to Meridian and you were flying jets, then no, you were pretty much TAC Air from that point on. I mean, we call TAC Air. I mean, the Prowler, some would argue isn't, but electronic attack. So at the time it was Tomcats, Hornets, Super Hornets were just starting to be something you could select. The S3, Viking, and then the Prowler. And then if you were a Marine, you got, the Harrier was an option as well.
Was there anything that you really did not want to get?
Well, I didn't want the Prowler because I wanted to be able to, drop bombs and shoot other airplanes. But fortunately my landings were terrible, so I didn't have to worry about that. The S3 probably would have been the second one I didn't want, but in hindsight, that would have been a really great plane to fly because they were based on Coronado Island, and in San Diego, and I could have bought a house there when it was affordable.
The things you don't think about when you're
I know, because
22.
then they all transitioned to Super Hornets later anyway. So, but yeah, I wasn't thinking that far ahead.
What does the training for carrier landings like? Are you already starting that in the T-45?
Oh yeah.
What's that look like?
Yeah, so I mean, every time we landed in the T-45, we landed in what was called a carrier box. So it's just a painted area on the side of the runway, just shifted over a little bit, and there's the Fresnel lens, the meatball that you hear about on the side of the runway. And so every single landing, and it's for us, the landing starts. I guess the Air Force, you call it a beam, but we call it the 180, we don't make we don't square our pattern, so it's not like a 90-degree turn to base and then a 90-degree turn to final. It's a constant 180-degree turn, and there's history behind that, and that was based on the Corsair. The Corsair, the F4U had a really long nose, and it was really high angle of attack, and so if they flew us straight into the carrier, the pilot wouldn't be able to see the boat. And so they flew this constant, angle of bank turn all the way to final, so that they could see the carrier the whole time. So that's the way we train. Start at the 180. We knew exactly what airspeed we had to be, which we fly angle of attack, which is a little bit different than Air Force. So we depending on the plane, it was certain units of angle of attack. And then we knew what altitude we had to be, and it was based on our radar altimeter. And then you knew what descent rate you had to pick up. And then you had checkpoints, when you were at the 135, when you're at the 90, you're at the 45. And we just drilled that into us from the very first day of jet training. which is a good thing because the first time I went to the boat, I honestly don't remember what my first landing was like because I completely spaced out. I just checked out completely and was on, brain stem power, muscle memory. I mean, next thing I know, I landed and I'm looking around going, I'm on a boat, like how'd this happen?
Were you on a two-seater?
It's a two-seater, but you go solo the first time.
Really?
Yeah.
How were you scared?
Obviously, because I don't remember it, Yeah, I was petrified. It didn't help either that, the day before I went to the boat for the first time, my on-wing instructor, is the guy who taught me how to fly the T-45 in the very beginning. He had crashed into the water on that detachment and died. Yeah, apparently I think there was an A-10 pilot in his back seat just going out for a good deal, and the stick got caught in the leg restraint lines, and they just couldn't, they just rolled and kept rolling. And when they realized they couldn't recover, they tried punching out and ended up punching out right into the water. So, I hear about this. We have an all officers meeting, and I thought, well, that's it. I guess we'll just go back to Kingsville and try again next month, And then they said, okay, Stewart, you're going first thing in the morning. You ready? I was like, wait a second, somebody just died? And they're like, yep, mission goes on. And I was like, wow, it's a pretty heavy introduction to military aviation.
Yeah, that is heavy. You realize like the longer you're in this business, the more friends you lose.
Oh, yeah.
Just, acquaintances, people you came across.
Yeah.
It's just dangerous.
It is dangerous. And, and I don't know if it's just me or if other people feel the same way. But when I hear somebody died in an airplane accident, man, I'm like, dang, that sucks. But it doesn't like stop my life, I'll remember times with that person, I'll have good memories, but it's kind of like almost if the longer you stay in it, the more you expect it,
Yeah. And, there's sometimes it's something that could be prevented.
Mm-hmm.
And then you tell yourself, oh, well, I won't do that.
Yeah.
And then other times it's just, random acts of God or whatever things that are just completely out of the blue that are hard to prepare for.
Yeah.
But it's definitely something you have to get your mind around. I remember one of like our class leader in the T-34 like passed away on it's like a weekend barbecue, and he's flying a pit special with a friend, and something happened, and I never got the full details of it. But then he's just gone, And then the longer you're in the business, you start looking back, and you're like, wow, we lost a lot of people that we knew. But it's just I guess it's kind of the nature of the business for anyone who wants to, if you're going to fly an airplane, low, fast, landing on boats,
right.
Shooting at people who are trying to kill you, all this stuff. Like, it's not always going to go perfect.
Yeah.
I guess, you had to learn that really quick.
Yeah. Yeah, you do. And when I got winged, we had our winging party at the O Club in Kingsville, and we had family there. And I remember my mom walking up, to me and my friends, and we're staring at this big screen. There's a projector, and they're playing mishap after mishap, like on carriers of planes just crashing on the boat. And we're just fascinated. We're just sitting there drinking our beer, watching these planes crash. And Mom's like, "What are you doing?" I'm like, "Nothing. We're just watching planes crash." But that was just, I don't know, it was just a morbid curiosity. You want to know what happened. You want to, okay, what did they do that I'm not going to do? Or what do I have to look out for? Or just like the more you were aware of it, maybe it's desensitizing us. I don't know, but it was, pretty interesting.
And we're like flying these airplanes before our prefrontal cortex is fully developed.
Yeah, that's a fact.
When stuff like that would happen, I just never even fathom that it would happen to me.
Yeah, absolutely.
Like, oh, that sucks. That happens to other people.
Yeah.
And then as you get a little bit older, you realize like, no, this happens to everyone.
Yeah.
It's not, there's no rhyme or reason to it.
Yeah. My risk aversion definitely went up considerably when I got married. And then when I started having kids, it definitely increased each time. And it was time for me to retire when I did, because I was like, I don't know if I'm going to go that low. Might just go a little bit higher.
You start thinking about all those little near misses and the stuff that happens at night and the weather.
Yeah.
And you're going, I think I had my fill.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, the 45, 40-year-old brain is very different than the 22-year-old.
Yeah, it for sure is.
Yeah, that's wild. And so you went out there and you stuck it though, and you landed on the boat your first
Yeah.
time. And did you have to go around, or did you just come in and do it?
Yeah. So the first time you roll in behind the boat, they stop you. So you do catch a wire, and then they pump you full of gas. And the intent there is obviously if you can't catch a wire in the future, you have enough gas that you can divert. But there are so many. Yeah, we have so many touch and goes. I can't remember how many touch and goes we needed. I think it was like 4 touch and goes and
Yeah.
10 landings or something like that. And so you trap the first time, they pump you full of gas, then you launch, and then you knock out a couple touch and goes, and then trap, and then you just kind of keep repeating it. And that became pretty routine to the point where we were on deployment. They would call them bag X's, where it was like you could see how many traps you could get, on a tank of gas. And so they're like, all right, you're up for a bag X tomorrow, and you launch and just go as fast as you can. And people would launch off the front end, immediately suck up their gear, start turning downwind. I mean, it was, you want to get as much as you can, but when you're just a student in T45, you're just, you're staring around like, am I doing the right thing? Am I doing the right thing? And it was pretty common that guys would launch off the front of the boat and just kind of drill straight ahead. And then there'd be an instructor overhead circling, kind of making sure that everyone's staying in the pattern. And you hear this voice go, turn. and then okay, got to turn.
The voice of God on the radio.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's funny. I remember one of my first times in the basic surface attack pattern. So everyone's just filing like a rectangle pattern, and you're practicing your ground attack. And that happened to me. I'm like so far behind the airplane, I'm hanging from the tail.
Yeah.
And I fly past my base like a half a mile. And then the student behind me, he turns like a couple tenths of a mile early, and so now we're like in line formation on base leg, which is not ideal.
Yeah.
That it reminded me of that. You have to keep up, don't you?
Yeah,
because you're not the only one out there.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, that's cool. So you make it through the gauntlet. You end up in a Hornet, and where'd you say, Virginia Beach?
Virginia Beach, yeah.
How, dude? So unmarried at this time?
Yeah, I was single. I was loving life,
Top of the world, right?
Yeah. I had a surfboard, I was surfing, I was going to the bars, I'm doing exactly what I'm supposed to as a young fighter pilot, going to the Oak Club and just, raising hell every night. And back then the Oak Clubs on naval air stations were pretty wild, especially at Oceana. So it was just a really good time.
Yeah, there's nothing like your first fighter squadron.
Yeah.
Like that feeling of you finally make it. You're there, and you're just kind of like living the life, huh?
Yeah, and my class was very fortunate. We had a former Tomcat pilot who was going in the reserves. He was going to fly F-18s in the reserves, so he was going through the transition syllabus, and he convinced the Navy to let him go through the full thing, just because they call, like, if you're a brand new aviator, they call it a Cat 1 syllabus, which is about a year long. If you come from another TAC platform, they would usually have you do what was called a Cat 4, maybe a Cat 3, which is just a couple weeks to maybe a month long. But he convinced the Navy to let him go through the full thing. So we had this lieutenant commander that was, basically teaching us how to be fighter pilots. He was a Top Gun grad. I'm like, yeah, we're listening to everything you say, man. Okay. He's like, we're at the Oak Club this afternoon. Roger that. We're at the Oak Club this afternoon.
Copy all.
Yeah. So it was great. It was a really, really good time.
Did you guys upgrade like we do in the Air Force, where it's like get some experience as a wingman, then 2-ship flight lead, 4-ship? How does that work for you guys?
So once we finished the RAG, which is the Fleet Replacement Squadron, they call it the FRS. Once we finished that, we get assigned to our first squadron. I stayed in Virginia Beach. I went to VF 87, and you show up as just a wingman, and you're not even a qualified wingman, but you're just there, right? So there is a training syllabus for you to become a qualified combat wingman, and then they start working on the flight lead stuff, and that happens Probably, 6 months to a year is when you'll begin that process. And you probably, a year to 18 months, probably when you're going to become a 2-ship section lead. And then you start working on 4-ship or division lead. And then the senior guys, like the O4s, they would have like a strike lead where they would work with the whole air wing, and leading a strike package. But yeah, I mean, I thought, hey, I finished the rag. I'm it, like I'm
Good
an
to
expert.
go.
And I realized, man, I don't know anything. I don't know a single thing.
Yeah, that is a bad feeling when you realize that everything you learned.
Yeah.
For us, they call it the B course, but in your initial like fighter training before you get to your operational unit,
Yeah.
you realize that like the expectation is that you're perfect at all that stuff all the time,
Right.
Because it's
Right.
not even, it's not really the substance of executing
Yeah.
the mission. It's like it's the basics,
Yep.
and then you basically get like a license to learn, as
Yeah.
they say, from there.
Yeah.
And you're going like, oh, like I actually haven't made it. Like
Yeah.
I could still be
Yeah.
gone. anytime.
Exactly.
And then you realize like, oh, there's also people who get like one assignment in the airplane,
Yeah.
and they go do something else and they never get invited back.
Yeah.
And you're like, I'm gonna have to fight for this every day of my career if I want to keep doing this.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's exciting, but it's also it's definitely a grind.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure.
It's hard to I don't know if you have like different hobbies and other interests outside of aviation. I don't know about you. Maybe you're had more bandwidth than me to start with, but I found it very difficult to be a fighter pilot and anything else.
Yeah.
It's like you're not going to be like a really good like age group swimmer
Yeah.
and a fighter pilot at
Yeah.
the same time, or a marathon runner, or whatever it may be. I don't.
Yeah.
Did you feel that at all?
I mean, you're so consumed with, your job and learning how to be a fighter pilot that I think it's very difficult. I was always impressed with my classmates that, were married,
Yeah.
or the ones that had kids when they're going through that. And they did exceptionally well. It's not that you can't do it, but I spent all my time with fellow fighter pilots,
Yeah.
Like I lived with them, I worked with them, we socialized together. I did do rock climbing with a buddy, and we would just go to the rock climbing gym, or we would meet up for poker night. But again, it was all fighter pilots, and
Still talking about
yeah,
work.
you're still
and-
talking about work, even though you swear you're not going to, you still do.
Yeah.
But yeah, it was. But that's why I say it was a good time in my life. Not because I liked being single, but because I focused all of my efforts into that job. And it was really cool.
Yeah. And you're like being indoctrinated into the tribe,
Yeah.
and you're just like, yeah, the like you said, the Top Gun graduates, or like the chiefs of the tribe.
Yeah.
And you just want to be just like them. That's how I felt.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Looking at these guys.
Yeah.
I remember when I was an airman, and I would look at a pilot, and he could be like a student in T-38s,
Yeah.
or like a lieutenant colonel, like, weapons school graduate. And to me, it was all the same.
Right.
And then once you get in and start working your way through, you realize like, oh no, there's like many levels
Yeah.
to this thing.
Yeah.
And being a brand new wingman is like the lowest rung.
Right. Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah. And then just for those watching or listening, and just kind of the hierarchy, at least, and correct me if it's different in the Navy, but for the Air Force, it's like, wingman, 2-ship flight lead, 4-ship flight lead. Then there's a whole bunch of other qualifications for depending on your mission set, like forward air controller, combat search and rescue, all that stuff. But then above instructor pilot is weapons school graduate,
Yep.
or Top Gun graduate. And then you realize like, okay, so instructor is kind of like, the way I was explained is like, it's like being a black belt
Yeah.
and flying the jet. But being a Top Gun graduate or a weapons school graduate, that's like being like Hodger Gracie
Yeah.
of the black belt. So there's even like stratifications at the
Right.
highest level. And they're just people that were like so incredibly talented.
Yeah.
I'm like, where did they find these people? Like they must have like the biggest nuggets, you know, the IQ through the roof. And then there's some of the nicest guys in the world too. And you're like, man, they really,
Yeah.
they really are just
Yeah.
superior in every way.
Yeah. But then you find the ones that aren't so good too. And,
Yeah.
you're like, wait, really?
How'd you slip through?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. There's always a few of those, right?
Yeah. I mean, I was very fortunate that I had a lot of really good role models when I was, lieutenant junior grade. In my first cruise, I looked up to all the Top Gun grads. In the Navy, you when you go to Top Gun, then you get an assignment to the weapons school, either the East Coast or West Coast weapons school, or at the staff at Top Gun as an instructor, or to it was NSOC, now it's called NAUTIC, which is like the mecca for naval aviation tactics in Fallon, Nevada. And then you go to a squadron as a training officer. So every squadron has a training officer who is a Top Gun graduate, and his only job is to make sure that that brand new Lieutenant JG wingman gets the flights he needs to progress and to advance as being a section lead and a division lead. So I was very fortunate that I had some really good ones to look up to, and they made me want to, kind of pursue that path. Because the way I looked at it was like the two pinnacles for being a Hornet guy is you can either go to Top Gun or you can go be a Blue Angel. I mean, like those were the two like
special things.
Yeah, one was like recruiting and one was tactics, and I just didn't have the body shape to fit into a tight blue flight suit. So I was like, I'm going to focus on tactics, And so that was what I chose to do.
That's awesome. Yeah. Did you watch that Blue Angel special on Amazon?
Yeah.
That was really good.
It was awesome. Yeah. Yeah. The boss in that show was actually one of my instructors at Top Gun.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
So he was a Top Gun grad, and those are the guys I was kind of referring to.
Yeah, exactly.
Where they're just like where do they find these people?
Yeah.
Yeah. I recommend everybody watch that if you love airplanes. Like the footage in that was so cool.
Amazing. Yeah.
I'm like, when I retired, I'm like, I cannot wait to get away from this. I'm so burnt out.
Yeah.
And then a couple of years go by, you watch that and you're like, man, I miss flying.
I know. Yeah. It's funny. People always ask me, like, do you miss the Hornet? And I'm like, no, I really don't. Now I'll caveat to say, if someone said, hey, there's a Hornet parked out there, do you want to go fly it? I'd be like, heck yeah, I'll jump in, I'll start it up and take it flying. But I don't miss, putting on all the gear. I don't miss sitting in the jet when it's 100 degrees out,
8 hours of mission prep, maybe. Yeah.
I don't miss all that stuff. I miss the guys, I miss sitting around a table like this, either with a beer or a coffee and just, telling stories. I miss that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I feel the same way. It's like, yeah, when you get to the point where you're like, your hand's been numb for a year and a half.
Yeah, exactly.
Like, you know when it's time to hang it up, stuff like that.
Yeah, my weekly chiropractor appointments remind me, why it was time.
Yeah, that's cool. So going back to when you're this, young fighter pilot before we got broken down. So, so you saw combat pretty quick, didn't you?
Yeah. Yeah. So when I showed up at the RAG in Virginia Beach, and I went to go do my first F-18 simulator. That was September 11th, and I remember driving into the base, listening to the radio, and going, "Wow, plane crashed into the World Trade Center. Man, the weather must be bad." In my head, as a new pilot, I'm thinking, "Man, they must have screwed something up and crashed into it. That's crazy." Well, when I got into the sim building, they had the TV on, and you see the smoke rising. I'm like, well, the weather's not bad. And then that's when the second plane hit, and I was like, yeah, this is war. Like, we're going to war. The base itself completely changed. I remember they were talking about loading up the Tomcats with all these missiles and sending them on caps over New York and DC. And I don't know whether they did or not, but I know that there was a lot of talk of, hey, the next attack could be here, the next attack could be there. And of course, Oceana was the master jet base on the East Coast. So we're thinking that could be a potential target. We really didn't know, but, it finally settled down. squadrons were already deployed. You know, they were starting to drop bombs in Afghanistan while I was going through training, but everything took on a little bit more sense of urgency for me. Like I know that when I would, for instance, when I was doing close air support, I know that I'm going to be employing for real one day, so I better take this seriously, you know? And then I joined my first squadron. My first squadron, VF-87, they were one of the first squadrons to drop in Afghanistan after 9/11. They were actually on the Enterprise on their way home when 9/11 happened and the boat turned around. And so they were some of the first guys there. And so I check into the squadron, their first new guys since they've been back from Afghanistan. Again, thinking I'm like, hey, I know stuff, but I'm looking at all these guys who have dropped bombs in combat. And I'm like, I am way out of my league, you know. But great group of guys got me spun up, you know, trained me. And then we went on, let's see, that would have been spring of 2002. We do the full workup cycle in the summer and the fall. And then we were, one of the last workup things you do is, it's called a JTFX, which is, let me just back up a little bit. So when you do a workup cycle as a squadron that's deployed on a carrier, you start off with SFARP, Strike Fighter Advanced Readiness Program, and that is squadron based. So it's kind of the similar workups where you do 2-ship or section tactics, then you do 4-ship division tactics, and you do, you know, offensive, defensive, all this. You know, we have air to surface, we have air to air. But it's kind of all in house with just your squadron, and then you go to Fallon, Nevada, and they do what's called Air Wing Fallon. So they bring the whole Air Wing in. So you've got all the Hornets, you've got all the Tomcats, you've got the S3s, you've got the Prowlers. Now you're starting to learn how to integrate with each other. So you're learning how to, for instance, when the Prowler is doing a jamming mission, they're defenseless. They need a Hornet to kind of escort them to do a high value asset protection mission. So I would learn how to be that guy to sit there on the Prowler's wing and then kind of make sure that, you know, I'm protecting him from being jumped from air-to-air threats. We do learn how to be harm shooters, you know, for the Prowler. We learn all the stuff. We're integrating the entire air wing together, and then you go on the boat and you do Comp 2X. And I think it's a composite training unit exercise. I talk about it in my book. I think that's what they're doing. But Comp 2X is where now the air wing is embarked on the ship and they're learning how to integrate with the ship's assets. So if you're doing a defensive counter air mission, you know, against threat aircraft, you learn when you hand them off to the ship to use SM2s from the Aegis cruisers or whatever to take them out. And then the last thing is the JTFX, and that's a bigger picture. And it's really more for like the leadership, more for like the strike group, you know,
Command and
commander,
control, all that stuff.
Yeah, it's you're using the whole strike group's assets now, and you know there's submarines involved and a bunch of stuff.
Wow.
And so we were doing that. We were going down to Puerto Rico. Roosevelt Roads was still open. Rosie Roads was open, and at the time it was still where we were doing a lot of our training. And there was a rumor that, hey, we're going to go on this and we're not going to come back. We're going to go straight over to, you know, the Middle East. And so we kind of prepared for it. We packed all our stuff on the ship, and sure enough, you know, we were on that exercise, and they said, you know, they came over the 1MC on the carrier, and the captain said that we were steaming for, you know, the Middle East, and that Iraq was going to kick off. And so we went straight to the Med. We were one of 2 carriers in the Eastern Mediterranean, flying missions into Iraq through Turkey. So.
Wow. Wayne, how long had you been in your squadron at this time?
So that was less than a year. Yeah, that was. So I think I joined the squadron, I want to say like in May of 2002, and this would have been December, January of 2003.
Wow, that's an insane timeline.
Yeah.
It's just like just getting probably comfortable in the airplane and all you're expected to do.
Yeah.
And even as a wingman, you still have to be prepared to be by yourself. Your flight lead might break, all kinds of things can happen. And it's a lot to manage. And like you talked about, you know, when I was a young guy, when I pictured flying a tactical aircraft, I pictured me in my airplane executing the mission.
Right.
whether it be like, strafing
Right.
tanks or whatever it is. And you realize that when it comes down to it, there is a whole lot more happening outside of what you're doing
Oh yeah.
that you have to kind of track and integrate
Yeah.
with. And that's really, I think, what separates, a good pilot and a great pilot is someone who can keep the situational awareness
Yeah.
on everything that's happening in the battle space.
Yeah. And there were plenty of times where I did not have that situational awareness
Absolutely.
on that deployment, especially. There was one mission in particular. I was carrying a JSOW, the Joint Standoff Weapon. So standoff being the key part of that weapon's name. And we were told that there was a surface-to-air missile site that had been targeting coalition aircraft. They wanted us to take it out. And we're like, perfect. Got the perfect weapon for it. Put in the coordinates and everything. I'm ready to go. And they said, oh, but we want you to get battle damage assessment. So we want you to fly over it. Like, so that doesn't make sense. So the JSOW, for those who don't know, you drop these wings open up and it basically glides to the target. And then the version I had a bunch of bomblets inside. So it got to the target, opens up these little doors, these bomblets, disperse and it explodes. So we go ahead and execute this mission. I didn't know at the time, but an F-16 CJ was said they would go with us. I didn't know what that meant. I was like, okay, like you're not a prowler, so that means nothing to me. And so I'm on my lead's wing, and I drop the JSOW. We're trucking into the MES, the missile engagement zone, and out of the corner of my eye, I see this blossom of light, and it's right in the direction of where that missile site was. So in my head, I'm thinking that's a missile plume, like it's launching, right? And so I remember saying like, heads up, missile launch. And my flight lead goes, dude, that was your JSOW blowing up. And I look down on my FLIR pod, and you can see all the little bomblets blowing up. So what I was thinking was a missile plume was actually the little explosions. So I didn't have situational awareness
Yeah,
at all.
until you've seen it, you're just kind of going off of what you've heard and what you've been trained on or watched, but you have to do it for real to really internalize it. That's interesting. Did you guys crush the target?
Yeah, we did. I got an award for it, which was pretty cool. But that cruise in particular, every single time we took off, we came back with nothing that we left with. So all our bombs were slicked off. In fact, we did primarily on-call close air support, because up in the north where we were operating were a bunch of special operations forces or 3-letter agency guys that were in the muck and didn't have, the conventional military support they were having in the south of Iraq. And so we were it. And they said, okay, if you guys don't drop when it's time for you to go back to the boat, here's a list of targets you can hit. And they gave us a list of all these tanks that the Iraqis had kind of buried in ditches, and you could see them. And so you just pick one that wasn't glowing and like, okay, that one's not glowing, I'm going to hit that one. And so you drop your LGB
Just clean the wings off every
exactly.
mission.
Yeah, it was awesome.
Was this part of like the initial shock and awe campaign?
Yeah. So the very first night of shock and awe, we actually, our air wing sent guys down through. I think they went into Iraq a different way. Like they went south through the Red Sea, and then they went a different way. But it was all the senior guys. So as a brand new guy, I was not one of the ones on that mission. But then once they did those opening nights, then they shifted to having us fly through Turkey and come into the north, and then that's when I started flying. But yeah, this was the very first days of the war.
Did you get shot at ever?
Yeah,
other than like small arms.
Yeah, I mean, I remember seeing flak bursts. On my first mission, in fact, it was the first time I thought like, holy crap, they're shooting at me. There was an initial shock of like kind of fear, like they're shooting at me. And then it was immediately replaced with like, how dare you shoot at me, and that became very commonplace, where you would see that. What we found out later was that the Iraqis definitely were afraid of American air power. And so we would watch videos that guys had on their targeting pods of a little dude that runs up to a AAA piece and fires it, and you see it go off, and then he jumps out and runs away, and then another guy runs in, jumps, because they were afraid that, if I stay on this AAA piece too long, I'm going to get shot, rightfully so. But 9 times out of 10, just as a guy would run to get in, a bomb would hit and take him out. So it wasn't really good strategy, but yeah, surface to air missiles, saw a bunch of those. Usually they were unguided. They would just send up these big telephone poles into the sky,
Big
and yeah,
log coming at
yeah,
your general direction.
yeah. But you could tell they weren't guiding on you at all, so that was pretty good. They were very afraid of the harm missile, so we shot plenty of those as well.
Did you do any close air support at that time? Like any troops in contact?
Yeah, a bunch. That was, like I said, primarily what we were doing. And I'll never forget. When you hear a guy, calling for close air support, trying to talk your eyes on the target, and in the background you can hear machine gun fire, or you can hear, incoming mortar fire, and you're like, this is for real. Like, this guy needs us right now. I was very lucky on my first deployment. We had a reserve squadron with us, which, having been a reservist, it makes perfect sense to me. But these guys, basically, they didn't care about anything. They were just going to do the mission, and they were very professional at it, but they didn't care about the politics, right? So, in the opening days of the war, our air wing commander, our strike group commander said, there's a 10,000 foot min out. You're not going to go below it. And I remember these reserve guys, were dropping bombs, and the JTAC was like, hey, what else you got? And we got 20 Mike. That's it. And they're like, all right, you cleared to strafe. And they're like, can we do that? Yeah, let's do it. So they've completely violated, the min out and strafed and got the desired effects. But yeah, I mean, numerous times, we were talking to JTACs, you could hear the machine gun fire in the background, and you're putting, bombs on target, and you're in a stack with all different types of aircraft. It was a really good deployment in terms of seeing action.
Yeah, it's like I describe it as like the symphony of destruction.
Yeah.
When you get the entire stack with everybody.
Yeah.
And everything, it could be Apaches, Hornets, Hogs, AC-130s, whatever else might be there. MQ-1s, MQ-9s, and you're just it's so much firepower.
Yeah.
And then like you said, when you hear that call on the radio and you hear that distress, and you kind of at that point assess the urgency.
Yep.
And then you're like, I don't know. I definitely felt the nerves too, especially the first few times doing that. And then you realize it's like, wow, I'm actually trained to do this. I know exactly what to do.
Yep.
You're like, okay, well, let's find them. Let's find the targets.
Yes.
Who else is in the stack? And you start going through all the required things to be able to get the job done. And I remember that first moment too, where you're just like, whoa, they're relying on us right now. That's heavy.
Yeah. Yeah, it is. But then you realize that this is really good training, because I never felt unprepared for what I was doing,
Yeah, the military, like pilot training, and then your follow-on training is very good.
Yeah, absolutely.
Like by the time you've made all of those quality cuts, and you've gone through the gauntlet, you've been just kind of beaten down and then reformed.
Yeah.
It's like at that point you're just like you're ready for it, I think.
Yeah.
We'll take a quick break.
Sure.
And then we'll get into what happened after that.
Yeah, sounds good, man.
All right, cool. All right, so after that first deployment where you guys are just wrecking shop, what happened next in your career?
Well, I came back from that deployment, and there was a squadron down in Beaufort, South Carolina, that needed somebody to go on cruise with them, and I was single, and so I packed up and moved from Virginia Beach, Virginia, down to Beaufort, South Carolina, and went right back on deployment. I think I was back on the boat 2 or 3 months later, and went right back over to the Middle East. This time I went to the Arabian Sea, and we flew missions in Iraq and Afghanistan, and didn't drop a single thing.
That's interesting. Yeah, that's kind of like my 06 deployment. Was it just quiet?
Yeah, well, the rules of engagement were, had shifted, where now we weren't trying to destroy the Iraqi, military. Now we were trying to protect their infrastructure. So we did a lot of pipeline reconnaissance missions where we'd fly along an oil pipeline, make sure that insurgents weren't trying to blow it up. And we did shows of force, but, we never really could get the ROE nailed down to actually take out bad guys, even though there was still shooting going on the ground, but we just never really managed to make it work.
That must have been a wild, just shift in perspective after that
Yeah,
first deployment.
yeah, it was a huge shift, and it was a new squadron, so it was a new group of people that didn't have the same experience I had, and so they were all kind of chomping at the bit, like, yeah, this is our chance. We're gonna go in there, we're gonna blow stuff up, and nothing happened, and but it ended up being a pretty good deployment for us. We came back from that cruise and we did we call it a summer pulse. It was like a 2 month little thing on a carrier off the coast of Great Britain, and I think we were doing it to prove the concept that you could take a squadron or an air wing and put them on a carrier with short notice and deploy with as long as you maintain certain levels of readiness. And so that was just a proof of concept we did that summer, and we came back from that one. I think it would have been probably like August, and I'll never forget it. So I had just gotten married. I actually flew home on a tanker, on the Omega tanker from the UK to get married, and so my wife moves to South Carolina, and she was going to her first wives club meeting. And after we came back, and I said, "Now, babe, they're gonna tell a lot of rumors. They're gonna spread gossip. Don't believe what they say." And so she comes home and she's kind of eyes are real big, and she's like, "They said you're going on deployment again." And I was like, "Nope, that's not gonna happen. Here's the reason why." And I laid out very articulately why we would not be going on cruise. And I go to work the next day and they're like, "Hey, did you hear? We're going back on cruise." I'm like, "What?"
The Wives Network proves right
Yeah.
again.
So of course I come home with flowers that day, and like, "You were right."
Welcome to the Navy.
Yeah, welcome to the Navy. So we there was a Marine Hornet squadron on the West Coast that wasn't quite ready to deploy, and so there was a spot for a Hornet squadron, and our commanding officer volunteered us, and so we ended up moving over to the West Coast and went on a Westpac, and that deployment was no combat operations. We just happened to be there in case China decided to invade Taiwan, which that's been going on forever, that fear. And so we were there to help prevent that. And then the tsunami in Indonesia happened, and so we shifted gears again and went to humanitarian aid. And we're doing a lot of missions in Indonesia supporting humanitarian aid.
So, what is it like to land on the carrier at night in the weather,
Yeah.
like way out at sea,
Yeah.
where there might not be other options? What's that feel like?
So, okay, so you're gonna break it down, right? So landing on an aircraft carrier is fun. It's just flat out fun. When you add nighttime, the fun goes away completely. You do get used to it after a while. You do start to go, okay, it's a straight in. It's I just gotta put my jet down and very small spot of real estate in the middle of the ocean. But you get used to it. It's never really fun, but you get used to it. And then you add bad weather, and that just is a whole new level. So when you roll in behind the ship, or at night when you're 3/4 of the mile, they'll tell you to call the ball. If you don't see the ball, your response is Clara, and that just means, hey, I can't tell if I'm high or low. And then the LSO immediately comes back and says you're high or you're low or whatever it is. You can also say Clara lineup. That means I don't see the lineup. I can't tell if I'm left of center line or right. And on an aircraft carrier, that's very important because too far one way or the other, and you're going to hit airplanes. I mean, we're parked really close to the foul line. Or you could say Clara ship, and that means I don't see anything. And there were some times where I was saying Clara ship, and the LSO's response would be, "You sound good, keep it coming." And you're just flying straight on instruments, and the seat cushion gets sucked up a little bit. But yeah, it's pretty terrifying sometimes.
You ever almost just get surprised, like right when you
Oh,
connect?
absolutely, yeah. And that they do tell you, they want you to be surprised. Like you're trained. Every time you touch down, you go full power. So in case you miss the wire, you just take off again. And they would tell you they want you to be surprised. They want you to add full power and think that you're going to go flying, and then be surprised when you get flung forward in your straps. But yeah, there's several times where it's like, oh, I made it, and then you look forward to see how small or big the guy who's trying to direct you out of the landing area. That tells you whether you caught an early wire, which isn't good, or a later wire, which is better.
Wow. Yeah, that would be so sketchy.
Yeah.
I mean, you probably never really get comfortable with that, I'd imagine. Anyway.
Yeah, no, never. And definitely taking off from a catapult at night, there's no comfort there, especially when it's on a moonless night, there's no horizon. And so you're sitting there looking at the front of the ship. And then when the catapult fires, it races towards you and then it disappears and it's nothing but pitch black. And so you've got like a split second to look in your HUD, your heads up display, to tell whether you're flying into the air or into the water. And you got to make a decision real quick.
Wow. Yeah, man, that's the one thing we don't have to deal with in the Air Force.
Yeah.
But it's definitely a tip of the hat thing. Like if you do that, you've got some big cojones.
I will say we had an Air Force F-16 pilot that did an exchange tour in my first squadron, and I'll never forget when he came back from one of his first night traps. He walked in the ready room. He goes, "You guys are crazy," But he was pretty consistent, where he would pull the nose up just a little bit when he touched down, which is totally counter to everything we're taught in the Navy. You don't touch, the angle of attack. But he was an F-16 guy.
Couldn't help it.
Couldn't help it. He just had to flare a little bit. And so it just became, first they would give him bad grades for it. Then it just became standard. So they started giving him better grades for it. It was just a little pull nose up at the ramp. And that was the typical Rico, pass.
He was able to get it down though?
Oh yeah, he was a really good pilot.
Yeah, that's cool. Yeah, I always thought those exchange assignments would be pretty neat. Never perfectly lined up with what I was doing, but I always looked for that, thinking it would be awesome. I thought the F-18 was like the only other fighter that appealed to me.
Yeah.
Like I want to fly the Hog, and that was it. And then if I couldn't fly the Hog, I was drawn to the F-18.
Yeah, and I think the opposite is true for me. I mean, the A-10 was always, my favorite. Growing up as a kid, I mean, I just thought it was fascinating that there's this plane that's built around a gun, period. It's
hell yeah.
built like just to shoot a really big round at tanks and kill them. And I was like, that's awesome.
Yeah, what's not to love about that?
Yeah.
Every kid wants to shoot tanks with giant Gatling guns.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah, then, twin engine, twin tails, single seat. That just seems right to me.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
So after that deployment, a little bit later, you went back to Afghanistan as a TACP.
Yeah.
What program was that?
So after that deployment, I went and did a instructor tour down in Kingsville. So I was teaching students. Then I did an aide job for an admiral, and then I joined the squadron that I ended up retiring from. It's an adversary squadron. So joined that squadron, went to Top Gun, went through the adversary course, and became.
So you went to Top Gun before the TACP assignment? Okay.
Yeah.
So Top Gun, let's talk about that.
Yeah. So that, so my squadron, being an adversary squadron, everybody that was in that squadron was either a blue patch wearer, so somebody that was a fighter, like a training officer in a squadron, or a red patch wearer, an adversary. And if you didn't have a patch when you showed up to the squadron, they sent you to Top Gun and you got one. And so I went through the adversary course, and I can't remember how long it was. It was a couple months out in Fallon, Nevada, and it was probably the most amazing time flying I've ever had, because everything you did was just tactics. It was briefing, it was flying, it was debriefing. And it was just, wake up, you're just absorbed in this world, and then you go to sleep and you do it all over again. And so it was awesome. And as an adversary, the way it works, you go through the course, you've got a group of fighters, guys that are going to be blue patch wearers that will go on to be training officers in squadrons. And then you've got a group of adversaries. And then we had controllers as well. So we had like E2 controllers. We had some Marine controllers, people that would be on ships that would be controlling like air intercept controllers. And everyone's kind of doing different roles. So the fighters are learning tactics from like our tactics, the friendly tactics, and then as the adversaries, we're learning, threat tactics. We're learning what the Russians are doing. We're learning what the Chinese are doing, the North Koreans, the Iranians, and then when we go out and fly, we'd face off against one another. So as an adversary student, I would be leading the red force, and I'd be face off against a blue student, and they'd have a mission, and I have a mission to stop them. And so it was a really cool experience. Came back like at the top of my game, like I knew the adversary job inside and out, and get back to the squadron. And a couple months later, they said, "Yeah, we're sending you to Afghanistan." I was like, "Wait, what?" And so the way it was explained to me was that, like I said, that second deployment I went on, we didn't drop any bombs. What they were finding in Afghanistan in particular is that Navy TAC Air were not going kinetic. They weren't dropping. And it was pretty common for a Navy jet to leave station, to return back to the ship and get replaced by F-16s, and they would immediately get clearance to drop. And so their argument was, and this was some brainchild in the Pentagon that said, it's because the Army doesn't know how to use Navy TAC Air. We're going to go ahead and take 10 TAC Air guys, and we're going to stick them with the Army. We'll call them air planners, and they'll get our jets to drop more. And every single one of us was like, this is a stupid idea. Like, this doesn't make any sense. But we went through the Joint Firepower course at Nellis. We learned joint doctrine for, close air support. And then they assigned us to this colonel. It was with a Expeditionary Air Support Operations Squadron, EASOS. And he's like, what are you guys, air planners? That's not in joint doctrine. We're like, yeah, we know. And he goes, well, I'm just going to use you like ALOs. And we'll send you out to FOBs, and you'll just be embedded with the JTACs and kind of run the air show for us. I'm like, yeah, sure, whatever. So we went out and did that, and quickly realized that it's not because the Army didn't know how to use us. It was because it doesn't make sense to have two F-18s in the North Arabian Sea transit for hours to get to Afghanistan, to have 20 minutes of on station time just to transit all the way back. When you've got jets that are deading out of Kandahar or out of Bagram, that can give
already airborne.
That can give hours of on station time. And so, yeah, the ground force commander would always, say, what do you want to use? And well, we've got a B-52 that give us, a couple hours, a B-1, a couple hours. We've got these F-16s with, an hour and a half, and Hornets with 30 minutes. Not using the Hornets, even though I was talking with my friends who were on the ship that were flying those missions, I'm like, sorry, bro. Like, I'm going to use the ones that are actually going to, put warheads on foreheads for me on the ground. And so, so they scrapped that program after, our deployment.
Yeah, that's it. So were you out there actually like calling in airstrikes?
Yeah. So I was, I had the qualification, but I was overseeing primarily. I was overseeing the JTACs, and in fact, the lieutenant colonel that I worked for forbade me from going outside the wire, but I worked with a really cool master sergeant that said, hey, I'll just leave you off the list until you come back, kind of thing, So,
Nice.
So yeah, because I couldn't just sit on the fob and do nothing, but there were some really, really cool missions that we controlled. There was one, we had one outpost that every single day at 5:30 was getting indirect fire, and like clockwork. 5:30 would just start coming in, and we knew exactly where they were setting up their mortar positions, where they were firing the rockets from. We had all the individual DIMPs. We knew the targets, and so we would call in fast movers to strike them. But the minute they heard them, they would stop shooting, which was part of the ROE, and then they would flee where they were shooting from, and so the pilots could never get a positive hostile ID on them and could never drop. And so this went on for like a week, and finally I was like, I've had it. And so I coordinated to have B-1 overhead, super high, check in hours before. I passed all the DIMPs to them. They programmed all their smart weapons. And then at 5:30, when we started taking fire, I was like, cleared hot. and immediately see all these bombs just boom, boom, boom. It was pretty epic.
Successful.
Yeah, it was pretty awesome.
No more indirect fire.
Yeah,
At least for until they replaced.
yeah. I
personnel.
actually found some videos. I won't say what one of my airmen said when the bombs were detonating, but that's exactly how we all felt. Like, yeah, take that, guys. You know?
Sleep well tonight.
Yeah.
Your Bob's not going to be getting schwacked.
Yeah.
Wow, that's interesting career arc. You know, your very first deployment, you're
Right.
wreaking havoc from the air, and then your last deployment, you're calling in airstrikes and supporting those guys from the ground.
Yeah.
It's pretty neat. You got to see like the full spectrum of warfare,
Oh,
really,
absolutely.
from our era.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And what year was this last deployment?
Well, so that one was 2010. And then I returned from that one and I left active duty and I went in the reserves. Stayed with the squadron that I was in. I was still an adversary guy. And then in 2015, our squadron had been exempt from sending people on these individual augmentee deployments. But then a new admiral came in and said, nope, you're no longer exempt. And so our commanding officer took 5 of us and said, okay, you guys are eligible, figure out who wants to go, decide amongst yourselves. And I mean, that's like the worst leadership decision ever. It pretty much caused morale to go in the tubes.
That's terrible.
Yeah. 4 of the 5 were like airline guys that had their 20 and could retire. And then there was me. And I was like, well, I'm not going to get out. You know, I can't retire yet. I was a brand new airline guy. So I was like, well, I guess I'll find a set of orders that I would like. So I found 6 months in Stuttgart, Germany, and I volunteered for it. And I told my commanding officer, I was like, hey, I'm volunteering for this. Basically kind of like, you know, taking one for the team, you know, kind of take care of me. And he assured me that he would. And I started doing my training, going back through Fort Jackson, South Carolina, wearing Kevlar and shooting M4s and pistols and driving Humvees and MRAPs. And I get a phone call from a Fort Bragg number, and they say, hey, we saw you had this experience in Afghanistan doing TAC P, and we really could use you in Africa. And I was like, okay. I volunteered for Germany. And he's like, yeah, we'll send you to Germany, but we'll spend 6 months in East Africa and then 6 months in North Africa. And I'm like, wait, I volunteered for 6 months total? So this was 2015, 2016. And I ended up, going with JSOC and doing counterterrorism stuff in Africa.
Oh, damn.
Yeah.
That had to be just eye-opening into
That
that whole world.
It was definitely eye-opening. I remember being read into a program, and obviously can't talk about it, but, you know, I was like getting tired. I was falling asleep, and then like I heard something, and I opened my eyes like, wait, what? Like, that's real? You know, like, I mean, I'll just say it's like James Bond stuff, you know, it's pretty cool.
Yeah. And was that your last deployment?
Yeah, it was. That was my last deployment. After that one, I decided I was just, I don't want to try for command anymore in the squadron. I just want to be a squadron pilot and finish out my 20 and move on with my life. I ended up doing a few more than 20 because of COVID and decided to stick around in the Navy for a little bit longer. But it was that deployment really where I was kind of inspired to start writing. Not because I wanted to expose the secrets of the things I'd learned, but I served with some really incredible people, you know, like going into that deployment, I thought the greatest generation was my grandfather's generation. I strongly believe that we could not do another Normandy invasion. But on that deployment, I realized, no, we, the warfighters could. It's our senior leadership and our politicians that would prevent that from happening, you know? And so I think I was fortunate enough to serve with the greatest generation and, not downplaying what our grandfathers did in World War II, but that same dedication is still there, you know? And so I was like, I have to put this out there. I have to tell stories. I have to, make sure people know that.
Yeah, that's interesting because in the books, there is something that I really wasn't expecting when I started the book, but how it blends a lot of the aviation
Yeah.
and then all of the kind of, I don't know, like the James Bond
Yeah.
ground. There's a whole ground component to it that's very fascinating,
Yeah.
and that makes more sense at what kind of inspired that.
Yeah. And the other part of it is just when you tell a story, I mean, you're a single seat guy. I was a single seat guy. It's pretty hard to have tension in the cockpit with yourself, like, so you have to have tension in other ways. And I felt like I can only do that in so many ways in the air. Like I can only have them shoot down so many MiGs, or I can only have them shoot
Yeah,
down so many helicopters. Like, what else can I do? And so I felt like the story itself needed to involve the bigger picture. Like you were talking about earlier, when you're a brand new pilot, it's just you in your cockpit, right? And you're doing your mission. You're not aware of everything else that's going on, around you. I wanted to kind of expose that it's one guy in one jet, but there's a lot of other stuff going on, and you may not know the full picture, but there's, a helicopter with a bunch of SEALs that are doing something that you don't know about it, but if you don't do your job, they don't get to the target. They don't get to do what they're sent to do. So that's the kind of thing that I'm trying to do with this series.
yeah, dude, you definitely nailed it. I mean, it's like I talked about earlier. I'm a fan. I loved
Yeah,
it. I
thank
can't
you.
wait for the next one.
Thank you.
So something I have to ask you about. So did you listen to like the Commander Fravor interview
Yeah.
with the Tic Tac?
Yeah.
And then I think there was another
Yep.
Navy F-18 pilot who described these
Yep.
orbs he's seen. Have you ever seen anything like that you could not explain
Yeah.
based on our current technology?
Yeah. So I'm going to start by saying that I had heard those interviews, and I thought they were crazy. I was like, man, these guys are going to make the F-18 guys look crazy. Like, I can't have that, So, and it's not that I'm not a believer of that it could exist. I just didn't believe them, and not because they're not credible, but because it's hard to believe, right? It's hard to believe that they could encounter something like that. So that's my belief. Going in through all my flights, I never looked for stuff. I never thought I would see anything. And then I think it was maybe 2 years before my retirement, I was actually doing an in-house BFM engagement, a basic fighter maneuvering, dogfight with one of my squadron mates out over the Gulf of Mexico. And I was pardon the use of hands, but I was coming up, and he was at my 1-2 o'clock, and it was driving aft, and I saw something just go right by my cockpit. In my head, it was a kind of a white orb, just kind of goes right by me, and instinctively I ducked, thinking it's a bird, and then I looked in my HUD and I realized I'm way too high for it to be a bird. So then my logical brain that thinks I'm not crazy, I'm not one of those crazy F-18 guys, it's got to be a glare off the canopy. So I just completely dismiss it. And then my wingman says, "Did you see that?" And I went, "I saw something." He's like, so he called and knock it off, and he says, "I'm going to chase it." And I'm like, I have no idea what we're chasing, but okay. So he continues out my 6. I continue pulling around. We had our radars out. We had a captive, air training missiles, the sidewinders that don't actually shoot. So we had the heat-seeking missiles out looking for anything. Couldn't find anything at all. And so now I'm thinking, okay, it's probably a weather balloon, maybe something that just is in the atmosphere, just floating around. We just passed it. And the whole way back to New Orleans, I'm thinking like we just completely wasted this training mission, over a weather balloon or something. And we get on the ground, and my wingman explains it to me and says that this thing went past my jet, turned, and then followed me. And he initially had asked, like, "Did you put out flares?" And I was like, "No, I didn't have any flares in my aircraft," because he saw something bright kind of come out the back of my jet, but then it turned, and I was like, that doesn't make sense. So then we sat in the debriefing room with models, and we're trying to like, okay, if we're moving this fast through the air and something's stationary, like we were trying to figure out how to debunk this thing, and we just couldn't figure it out. We pulled in a couple other guys. Another guy who was a Top Gun grad comes in and says, "Hey, I got a buddy that works for the Office of Naval Intelligence, and there's a whole task force at the Pentagon tracking this stuff. There's a form you can fill out." We're like, "Really?" So we went into the skiff, and we found this form. We filled it out, put in our narrative and all the information they asked for, and we sent it, not thinking anything about it. And then the next day, a guy from the Pentagon calls and says, "Hey, I want to give you and your whole squadron a classified briefing." And we're like, okay. And my commanding officer comes to me and says, if I see little green men in this brief, I'm just going to flip, but spoiler alert, there's, we didn't see anything definitive of aliens, but the bottom line is, that incident kind of inspired the beginning of Unknown Rider, because that Unknown Rider at the beginning is more like another article I'd read about orbs that have been circling Navy ships off the coast of San Diego, and I saw it on online news. I think it was like, I don't remember which online military thing with the Drive or something like that. But there was a really interesting article, and I was like, that's interesting. And then when I had my incident, I thought, okay, well, if it's not aliens, what could it be? And so I started asking myself that question, and that's kind of what inspired that whole story.
Yeah, that's fascinating. I always, I never thought they were like, little green men from outer space. My hunch at the beginning, after I listened to like the Commander Fravor interview, because that guy just seems legit. Like he is like not playing around,
And when you listen to him, you just go, those guys are not the kind of people that would just make stuff up.
Yeah. And then he's got the targeting pod footage as he's describing it. So, there are things out there that we don't understand.
Yeah.
And I wondered if it was potentially some advanced military technology that maybe like from the deepest like bowels of DARPA.
Right.
And they want to like maybe signal to the whole world that, hey, look, we have these, devices that defy physics as you know it. That would be a pretty epic way to do that, to just put it in people's minds. But again, it's just me sitting here theorizing. I really have no idea.
And that's, unfortunately, that was the gist of the brief that we got, is that we just don't know.
Yeah.
We just don't know what these things are. And if anybody should know, it's the military, and so one of the things that they want to do is kind of dispel the notion that if somebody comes forward and says, hey, I saw something, that they're going to be, that tinfoil hat conspiracy nut and dismissed. Like I was dismissive of those guys. They want us to be able to say with confidence, hey, I saw something, I don't know what it is. We should really find out what this is. And so they're trying to track it. And so I respect that. And I really have a hard time believing that there's some conspiracy to keep things secret from the people. I know it's funny. I talked about this incident on another podcast and immediately started getting a lot of UFO types that were reaching out to me and like, tell me more about what you saw. And, do you think that the government's lying to us? And I mean, I don't trust the government at all, but I don't think they're capable of keeping this a secret.
Yeah. It seems like they're legit trying to figure out what it is.
Yeah.
At least these task force anyway. Yeah, that's a fascinating topic. So I also want to ask you about your transition from this badass fighter pilot and then now you're this badass author. Yeah. So like again, I keep talking about, but I love the series.
Yeah,
and I want to know like first, like when you had the idea of writing these books, and then kind of like what's your process and how did you just take this idea and actually bring it to reality? Because a lot of people want to write a book, and a lot of like veterans have had amazing experiences. Mm-hmm. They've got the creativity, the drive to do it, but it's like, but not everybody actually gets to the finish line like you have. So like, where did that begin for you?
Well, I will say that, early on and when I was a young kid, I would spend a lot of time in libraries and bookstores. I mean, that's my parents would just drop me off and I would just be there for hours because for me, those were like, passports to adventure. Like anything I wanted. If I want to learn about the stars, if I want to learn about the ocean, I could find a book about it. And like I said earlier, I read anything I could get my hands on, the bigger, the better. And so I read a lot and it was, I read fantasy, I read science fiction, I read military thrillers, horror, anything. And over time started thinking, okay, maybe I should tell a story. Maybe I should start writing. And I mean, I'd say in junior high, I had a teacher that made us write a novella for an assignment, and that was my first, real effort of writing. And I knew nothing about how to tell a story. I just saw a movie in my head and started writing about it, and it was terrible. And then, at the Naval Academy as an English major, I did a lot of creative writing, but I'd start a book and get one chapter in and never finish it. I did a lot of journaling on my deployments. I wrote about all my combat missions. I still have them, and really it was just a way for me to kind of, like my grandfather did when I had his logs from his B-17 missions. I wanted to have something that I could pass down to my kids about my experiences. And I had shared those with my parents, and my parents would share them with other people, and they were like, "Wow, send more, and read more." And so I kind of kept reading, kept writing, and like I said, it wasn't until I went on that JSOC deployment where I thought, okay, I need to start writing a book. And so I wrote one, and I thought it was the best thing ever. I finished it, I think in 2020, and I immediately went out to start trying to find a literary agent. So you have to send out a query letter. It's a 1-page letter that says, "This is who I am. This is what I've written. This is what it's like." And you send it out to your dream agent, and you may or may not hear anything. Which, coming from the military, if you send somebody a message, you expect a response, right? Even if it's a no, even if it's, "This is terrible, I don't want to read anything that you ever write," you expect something.
Yeah.
And in this business, you may not hear anything. And so I just kind of, I'd send out a bunch, I'd get some rejections, I'd get, some silence. And then I was like, okay, I'm gonna write another one. And so I picked up and wrote another one. And because once you finish that first one, you kind of realize it's not as daunting as it seems. When your whole life you're like, one day I'll write a book, one day I'll write a book. And then that one day happens, it's kind of like, oh, I can do this, And so I think I wrote I wrote 5 books before I met my agent. And at the time, he wasn't my agent, but I was pitching him a book that I had written, and he said, "Wow, this is really good. It's very authentic, but it took place in Africa. A lot of it was based on my experience there." And he said, "But no one wants to read about Africa." I was like, "Okay,
thanks."
And he goes, "I mean, can it take place in the U.S.?" I'm like, "Well, my whole book is about hunting Al-Shabaab terrorists, so I don't think so." So basically, I went back to the drawing board, and he's like, "Well, let me read the whole thing," and so I sent him the whole thing. 6 months later, another agent offered me representation on that same book. So I went back to him and I said, "Are you still interested?" And he said, "Well, yeah, I really like your writing, but let me see what else you have." And so I sent him another one I had just finished, and he said, "Yeah, not that one. I don't like that one." And then I sent him 2 chapters of a book I just started, and he said, "Yeah, this is going to be your first book." And that book ended up being Unknown Writer. I finished it. He had me rewrite it, and it was funny because when he called me to tell me he'd finished it, he finished reading it, and he said, "Yeah, this is really good. This works well. I think if you move this around or do this." And at first, I'm hearing these comments, and I'm thinking, okay, he likes it. This is good. This is good. And then I'm starting to piece it together, like, this is going to be a big edit. And so I said, "So this sounds like about a 70% rewrite." And he goes, "Yeah, that sounds about right."
How
And I was like,
devastating was that? You're
"Oh
like,
yeah,
I
was
love
crushed."
it, but rewrite the whole thing.
I was crushed. So, but this was it. This is what I wanted to do. So I sat down and I rewrote it, and it wasn't quite there. But the thing was, each time I was getting closer to, number one, finding my voice. I was getting closer to kind of finding how to tell a story. And so when I finally finished it, he said, "Yes, you've got it." Then we went out to sell it, and sold it in a 4-book deal. And I've finished all 4 now, and I feel like each one I've progressively gotten better. I've kind of learned how to tell a story better. It's just putting in reps, just like anything else.
So when you start the book, are you just like free flowing, or did you map out kind of the narrative that you wanted to go with?
Early on, I would just start with a concept in my head of like for instance, another writer was like these orbs circling a Navy ship, and I wanted to answer why they were there, what they were doing. If they weren't alien and they were maybe a threat country, why would a threat country be doing that? What could they possibly be trying to gain from it? And so I'm trying to solve that answer through the course of the story. So I didn't really have a set plan, which was probably my mistake number one, is I didn't know where it was going to go. Like you should sort of have an idea of where it goes. I was just kind of writing to see what happens. And so I made a lot of mistakes along the way. In subsequent books, I had more of a framework that I developed, like maybe a 2-page narrative summary that basically says, okay, it's going to start here, it's going to kind of go here, and these twists and turns, and it all changes. I mean, every time I start the writing process, it will change as I go because I like to give my characters the freedom to do things that kind of
Right.
surprise me a little bit, you know? Like there's something that happens in Unknown Writer in chapter 9, which I usually know when a friend has read, you know, chapter 9 because I'll get a text and go, "Hey, bro, you okay?" And I wasn't expecting a character to do what that character did, and I was like, "Well, I'm just gonna go with it and see what happens," you know. And now people think I'm a psychopath.
Oh man, yeah, that's really interesting. Um, so what do you think the benefits are of like self-publishing now versus getting like a traditional publisher?
You know, the market the way it is today, it's very both are very difficult to be successful at. It used to be that a writer would just write a book, you know, from some cabin in the woods like we are here, right? And then you could send it into the publisher. The publisher publishes it. They do all the marketing. They do all the publicity. The author doesn't even have to go to any appearances, and it just sells. In today's publishing world, the author is more involved than ever, and so the author has to have a social media presence. The author has to, you know, to do some marketing campaigns, something to get their words out. Go on podcasts, like you know, do radio interviews, do TV interviews. The author is very involved in that, and the publisher does a lot less than they used to. So you would end up doing the exact same thing as a self-published. So the question is, what does a publisher buy you that you can't do self-published? The one thing that I look at a publisher being able to give me is distribution, right? So if I want to just sell ebooks, I can do that all day long on Amazon. If I want to just do ebooks and audiobooks, I can shell out the money to hire a narrator. I've got several on my cell phone right now that I can give you if you want one. And they'll narrate your audiobooks. They'll do all the, you know, production, and you can put that online and sell it. You can be very successful doing that yourself, but it's incumbent upon you, and your books will never be in bookstores. You'll never make the New York Times bestsellers list. You know, you're not going to get the necessarily the publicity that you would, you know, for like, let's say Hollywood, if you wanted to sell the rights, unless you're uber successful. And there's a few cases of people like Colleen Hoover was self-published and was not very successful until she became a TikTok sensation. And now she's like a multi New York Times bestselling author and a millionaire. And I would love for that to happen to me too, but,
Fire up that TikTok
yeah,
account.
exactly. But I'm terrible at TikTok, so I don't think that's going to happen for me. Yeah, but so I think it's just I have people ask me all the time, like, "Hey, I'm thinking about self-publishing," and my only comment to them is like, "Yes, you can be successful." And I have several friends who have retired from their day jobs who are making way more than I am making as a published author, self-published. They get the freedom to pick their covers, to do everything themselves, right? But it is incumbent upon them and the effort they want to put into it. They have to spend a lot of money on marketing and advertising and stuff like that. But I feel like once you go down that self-published route, it's going to be very hard for you if you want to get traditionally published later on, you know. And for me personally, and just the goals I had, I wanted to be self-published. You know, I mean, I wanted to be traditionally published right from the get-go. So I never considered self-publishing. You know, I went to find an agent. I had the agent help me develop my manuscript so that we could sell it, get me additional deals, and so that's the path I'm on. It's a arguably longer path. If you wanted to publish a book tomorrow, you could do it on Amazon.
It sounds like your agent actually made you better too.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And there's something that I hadn't really thought about.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm not an author, but
Yeah.
I hadn't considered that relationship.
And some agents are more hands-on than others, you know. I'd say I have a really good relationship. I consider him a friend now. And, you know, the book I'm writing right now, there was a period, and I think every creative goes through this where I think, oh, this is terrible. I suck, you know, like, you know, I'm going to get fired or whatever. And so I sent him what I had, and you know, he just sent me an email today and it's like, this is great. Keep going, you know.
Nice.
So, you know, he can be your shrink at times. He can be your cheerleader at times. He can, you know, be a taskmaster and whip you if you're falling behind. So they have to wear a lot of hats, you know, I'll say, but he used to be an editor with a big publisher. And so, you know, I think he was, I think, Tom Clancy's paperback editor at one point, and, you know, W.E.B. Griffin, he edited some books for him as well. And so he knows what it takes for a book to be successful. And so I just put my trust in him and my faith in him. And when he said, you want me to rewrite it? I'm going to rewrite it, you know?
That makes a lot of sense now. Like I said, I've read a lot of books. I've read a lot of self-published books, and just traditionally published books, obviously. And when I read this, it was like, wow, this is like elite level writing.
This
is not a side hobby. This is like legit. Like I rank it as with all the best military thrillers I've ever read. So
thank you.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense now that, you know, the way you work through it and then had to rewrite it so many times. And then come up with really a masterpiece, something you can be really proud of. So
one of my friends, Don Bentley, he likes to say that, you know, his first book that got published was the fourth one he wrote. So he's like, so if you consider that, like, I'm pretty much an overnight success, you know. And I was like, well, I had to write 6 before I got published, so, you know, I guess I'm even more of an overnight success. I don't know.
Dude, Don is so good.
Yeah,
I love that guy too. Yeah, I don't know. I'm just like, I read all these military thrillers when I was young. I didn't read like any while I was on active duty, and now I'm getting back into reading them again. And it's a blast. It's kind of a throwback to when I was younger, and I'm really enjoying it. So.
Yeah, for sure.
Well, cool, man. I just want to thank you for coming out.
Yeah,
I think it was a really cool conversation. Awesome career. I mean,
thanks, man.
You've done some amazing things, and then the opportunity to talk about your whole process and getting these books to market is just fascinating to me.
Thanks for having me out here, man. This has been great having this conversation.
Yeah, super cool. So for everyone out there, if you haven't bought any of the books, start with Unknown Rider. I promise you will not be disappointed. If you like audiobooks, just go order it right now. Just click on your phone to Audible and click Buy Unknown Rider. What is it? Ray Porter.
Yeah.
The legendary Ray Porter reads it.
Yeah.
The same guy who does all of Jack Carr's books. So the guy is just a performer.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, the voices he does, and I mean, it is a performance in itself.
Yeah. So I mean, if you're driving for work, if you can listen to an Audible book when you're commuting, I couldn't recommend it more. It's pure fun entertainment. So give it my full recommendation. So Jack Stewart, thanks for coming out.
Thanks, man.
If you have anything else you ever want to talk about, you have an open invitation, and maybe you can come out and bring the family sometime.
Yeah, I'd love it.
Enjoy the Oregon coast.
Yeah.
All right. Take care, brother.
Thanks.